Coming up on this week's episode of the Rip City Roundtable podcast, we have our special guest, Steve Dewald, back on the podcast, host of the Church of Roy podcast, not being produced right now, but it was a great podcast, and we might mention it towards the end of this episode. But anyway, this is going to be awesome. Steve comes in, has done a ton of research profiling players in this upcoming NBA draft. We found out the Blazers, they are drafting number one in... Oh, no, I'm joking. Never mind. That did not happen. We are drafting 7th. Not the outcome we were hoping for. The Blazers had the 4th best odds of getting the number 1 pick and end up 7th. So, little sad there, but Steve has some nuggets to give us. Not the Denver Nuggets, but his own thoughts on maybe why this is okay and maybe what the Blazers should do being in this position. But we really deep dive a lot of players. Steve is going to start profiling each, most of the top, say 13 to 15 players. So he'll go through what that methodology is going to look like, what we can look for. It'll all be on blazersedge.com. So you want to go to blazersedge.com to check out all of Steve Dewald's takes and all the other amazing content that we produce on the website. But anyway, without further ado, we're going to get to Steve because he's the guy that knows what's going on. If you're unsure about this draft this year, or you just saw the news on Mother's Day that the Blazers are drafting 7th and 14th, we did get the Golden State pick that did go to the Blazers, so that was good. But if you're wondering what's going on, this is the episode for you. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Steve Dewald on the Rip City Roundtable podcast. All right, we are back from break with, I was going to say the prophet, Steve Dewald, but I don't, maybe we won't go that far. Maybe just the storyteller, or I don't know, whatever is beneath a prophet. But Steve, thanks for coming on the podcast again. We appreciate having you. When you were here last time, we did say when it came time for draft, the draft season, you were going to come back on because this is your sweet spot. So you're here. You made it. Okay.
I'd also like to say that we officially cursed Zach Richase because I think after I brought him up on the podcast, I think he went like 3 weeks without making a 3-pointer in games. So my goal is I'm not going to talk about him today. So don't
bring it up. I was gonna mention, and you had linked this, but that the Ringer does their mock draft, and a certain somebody that we just named, they had him going to us at 7. So interesting how all things work out.
I mean, if he doesn't make another 3-pointer ever again, we can probably get him at 14. So we'll just keep going.
More value. Well, Steve, thanks for coming on. We want to touch on kind of 2 things, and we'll go from there. But the first thing I want to talk about is, the Blazers go into this draft with the 4th best odds to get the number 1 pick, and we totally flop on that and get the 7th pick. All these teams jump. Atlanta jumps. Houston jumps. All these teams jump us. So Blazers fans, we're sitting here on a Mother's Day on Sunday, which was a very weird day for this lottery. We're having Mother's Day lunch, and I'm like, the phone is at the table, and I'm watching this, and my wife kept giving me stares, but I was like, I just got to see. So why should we be happy that we're the 7th pick, the 7th team drafting in this upcoming draft?
Yeah, so first off, timing not great for sports on Sunday. So first we have the draft lottery, and then it's the Timbers and the Sounders. So my wife was less than impressed with some of my behavior on Sunday. To the main point, obviously Sunday. So there is some Blazer fanitis that goes on. So I think I've never met a Blazer fan that would ever miss an opportunity to be miserable on social media. So that's part of it. Obviously, when you see your team move in an opposite direction of where they should, you're not going to be excited, especially after the season that the Blazers had. If there's ever a draft where sliding might actually be a good thing, I think it's this draft class. Um, and that's mainly because I think outside of Alex Sarr, I don't think there's another player that you can say definitively that's going to come off the board before number 7. Now, of course,
Mm,
some of these guys will just by how the system works and how the process works, but I think anybody outside of Sarr is capable of sliding to number 7. Um, and I think the quality of the player, and now when I say this is not really the best class I've ever seen, I think I've probably done a poor job of explaining that. And really what that means is the top 10 picks in this draft typically they just lack the quality that most other top 10 picks have in other classes. Now, it doesn't mean that these players are bad and won't make it in the NBA.
mhm.
It's just harder to say, hey, this person's going to be an all-star. So, I mean, we rewind 2 years ago. I was very confident that Chet Holmgren, Paulo Banchero, and Jabari Walker were gonna be good players.
Mhm.
There's not really that lock. Even Alex Sarr, I don't feel that great about as far as saying this
Yeah.
person's gonna be an all-star. So when I say this class isn't as good as some of the other classes, it's really just talking about that quality. Now, these players, some of these players are gonna have very long NBA careers.
Mhm.
Um, I just think that I'm more used to viewing those type of prospects, more picks between 10 and 20
Yeah.
than 1 and 10. Um, and really like the really cream of the crop, like your top 3 is drastically different than what I'm used to. It's very similar to, and we've heard this before, is the 2013 NBA draft. I
Mhm.
mean, you're talking about the best players in that draft coming outside of the top 10 and CJ McCollum, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Rudy
Yeah.
Gobert. And this is a draft that really reminds me of that. Now, you're talking about a player that went on to be an MVP, a very high caliber NBA starter in CJ McCollum, and
Mhm.
a all defensive player in Rudy Gobert. There's going to be guys like that. It's just hard to project that right now. So there's a lot of variance in this draft. So
Mhm.
Blazers sliding to number 7. I think they're going to get the same quality of prospect that they would have at, pick number 4 or 5, even, number 2.
Yeah.
I think they're gonna have the same you're gonna be throwing a dart at a dartboard still.
Mhm.
Um, and you're gonna do it at a much lower cap commitment.
Yeah.
And I know, like, people don't wanna think about, "Oh, this is gonna save," you know, I don't care if Jody saves money, but really what this comes down to is flexibility.
Yeah.
I'd rather see the Blazers use that $3-4 million to take a flyer on somebody or take a bad contract and get a draft pick with it. That's what
Mhm.
I'd like to see them do with that money instead of, you're going to take a crapshoot at 2. Well, you can take a crapshoot at 7
Mhm.
and maybe still get the same type of player. And that's
Yeah.
why I view it. I know it sounds like a bad faith argument to say, hey, it's actually really good that the Blazers drop, but I think and my profile that's going to come out later this week talks about that in the introduction since it's the first profile is I truly feel unless your name's Alex Sarr, you can drop to number 7. And
Mhm.
also anybody that I'm gonna write a profile on could
Yeah.
go well before the Blazers. Like, there is no consensus in this draft outside of a couple players.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think those are I appreciate you explaining the take on that because on Blazers Edge and other media sources, everyone's heard this draft is bad, 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 whatever. But I like that you go a little bit more in depth about exactly what that means. And I think the first point I love that you made, I think the 2013 draft was what I was thinking about.
Mhm,
And if teams knew what Giannis was going to become, he would have been the number one pick in that draft. Same with Jokic when he was drafted in the second round. It's like, so there's still, you can still hunt these drafts for
mhm,
good players that potentially can break out. So just because, oh, it's a weak draft or it's a bad draft, there's players sitting here somewhere and
mhm.
it's just evaluating and then they have to land in the right spot. And in Portland right now, if you're a young player looking to prove yourself, I mean, this is kind of a good situation to be in.
That I think is a little more debatable than people
Okay.
want to acknowledge because I
Sure.
do think there are a lot of developmental mouths to feed on this team. So
Sure.
that's where I kind of get a little concerned about them taking 2 high variance players in this draft in the
Mm.
lottery at number 7, and the Warriors pick is awarded to the Blazers at number 14. Um, though those are concerning to me because I just really don't want to see I'd rather see number 14 be more of a tame, like, you'll hear me refer to players as, high floor or high ceiling. I'd like to see the number 7 pick be a high ceiling type player, so that's what typically people call a big swing.
Mhm.
Um, Someone who, like, Bruno Coloco, who was 2 years away from being 2 years away. That's the
Yeah.
type of player I'd like to see at number 7.
Yeah.
Um, just that really high upside, and then
Mhm.
maybe 14, you take that high floor player, maybe not really a premium position. So those are your centers, your point guards. I know a guard coming to Portland is nails on a chalkboard to some people, but
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
team will need a backup point guard
Yeah.
if Scoot Henderson reaches his potential. And I don't know if Anthony Simons is going to be that guy when this team is ready to compete
Yeah.
or be another guard. So I'd rather see a proven commodity there that might be more of a specialist, whether it's a shooting specialist like Dalton Connect
Mm.
or a the Duke. Let me get my notes out real
Yeah.
quick because
S
my
Steve brought the notebook here. He has the
Jared,
notebook.
Jared McCain out of Duke, who
Okay.
is, I think, someone who the more I watch him, the more I'm impressed with his floor. He's a good shooter, plays hard on defense, someone who has two-way potential. So more of that proven commodity at number 14, someone you could see more come in and play, someone who has, in my opinion, a similar ceiling to a guy like Tumani Kamara. Like
Mm.
Tumani Kamara, very good young player, but I kind of think I know what he's going to be long term. Whereas Shaden Sharp and Scoot Henderson, I don't really know where their floor could be much lower, but
Yeah.
their ceiling could be much higher.
Yeah.
And I would rather see high ceiling number
Okay.
7, high floor number 14, and then
Okay.
with the 2 second round picks, I think you just kind of got to start playing roster spot games and what the money game is. And, can you get someone just agree to a G League contract right out of the gate in the second round and then maybe develop them there and free up that flexibility for the
Yeah.
Blazers?
That's true. We didn't think about the remix kind of win here. They might get
Yeah.
some good talent down there. All the wild fans, Hand Fruit Nation, all that stuff. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's fun. I think it was Windhorst or not Windhorst. It was Woj today was talking about teams are interested in Bronny James just because of the marketability for the G League. So
Yeah.
the Bronny James stuff is I I don't know if there's I don't think there is a comparison historically for what's going on there where it's so clear that I think Bronny James is not an NBA player right now. Not that he won't ever become one. I mean, he's got a tough hill to climb,
Yeah.
but I've never just witnessed this where like we all know what's going on and we're just going to see who's going to take a bite of that apple. And
Man.
it's very interesting. And at the end of the day, I do kind of feel bad
Yeah.
for Bronny James at the end of this because he's just a kid. I mean, happens to be raised by LeBron James, but loves basketball and is trying to carve out his own career. And he's just in this
Sure.
weird spot.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I feel like those players, in just in normal situations of players that have parents that were high profile, NBA players probably tend to get a little bump sometimes. But this
mm,
whole thing with Bronny and then the whole, well, yeah, LeBron wants to play with him or whatever, it makes this so crazy that if he got drafted, Steve, I think in the top 10, I don't think I would be surprised. I would be shocked, blown
mm,
away, but I get it. Because in a draft
mm.
that people, okay, we're taking flyers on people. Well, why not take a flyer on Bronny just for the fact that LeBron might come?
Yeah, it's a bizarre situation, and I really don't know what, like, usually, like you said, we do see high profile players when their kids come up, they usually get a nod or a little more exposure than some other players. But usually that equates to like a summer league invite, like
Yeah, that's
Alonzo
true.
Mourning's kid
Yeah,
coming to the Heat summer league team. Like it's
yeah,
not, hey, you're going to be a first round pick or an early second round pick. Like
yeah.
that's out
Crazy,
there.
crazy.
So.
Well, but this is this first time. Well, and I don't have the history book in front of me, and I don't know if your notebook has this, but this is probably the first time where a player has been drafted where their dad is still playing, right? Or do you think that's I there probably has been, and in my head, maybe I'm thinking of Ken Griffey Jr. and
Yeah.
Griffey, but I don't know if that's ever happened. So then to have and not just playing, but like LeBron is still.
Yeah.
top 20. I mean, like, he is still a high level player. So to kind of have that pull is very unique, like you said. It really
Mhm.
hasn't kind of been seen here.
Yeah, I don't have that info, but that's a very good question. I can't think of one off the top of my head because
Yeah.
the Bear senior Barry was gone before his 2 sons came up, so
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the first one that jumps in my mind, but, like, I can't
Yeah.
think of anybody off the top of my head.
I used to go to those when I was a kid. I'd go to those AC Green basketball
No.
camps he would hold in Portland, and AC Green played forever. Like
Yeah,
he might have been in his 40s. He didn't have a kid, but I'm just thinking of older players. But maybe Arvidas could come back and play with Demontis. That would be
yeah.
interesting. We'll bring
I
him
mean,
back.
Arvidas already proved that you do not need to be able to jump to play in the NBA,
So
so, I mean, if
that
any player is gonna come back, we just gotta post him up down there
dude,
out of timeouts, so he doesn't have to run, and we'll
yeah.
put him on the block, and we're set.
Final possession of the game, just
Yep.
get that. I mean, perfect. We're okay. So I saw Jacoby, my fellow Baylor Bear here in
Mhm.
Waco. Where do you think he? I saw him slotted 14 again on the Ringers mock draft that they did going to Portland. What are your thoughts on him?
I think Jacoby is I mean, I think he's a very interesting player at 14 for the Blazers, but I also think he's a type of player I could see rise in this process. I think one players coming out of Baylor, I think are well coached, obviously, and they are ready to come into an NBA system. Also, he has some positional versatility that some of the players in that range do not have,
Yeah.
where I could see him playing up a position.
Mm,
And then if some of his playmaking comes around, I could see him, playing down a position or being that lead driving force. Tremendous athlete, like I said, very coachable, comes from a good system in Baylor. It's kind of like Baylor's and Villanova, a few years ago. I
mm,
always am interested in those types of players. Like Jeremy Sohan was one of my favorite players in the process a couple years ago, someone I
yeah.
really wanted the Blazers to get.
Yeah.
So I'm a fan of him at 14, but I do think just because of he has more track record of performing, I
Hmm.
think he's the type of player that could rise in this process.
Yeah. Okay. I like
And I
that.
think I think number 7 is probably a little too early for him to
Yeah.
go, but
Yeah.
he's someone I will have a profile on later in this process.
Cool. He's the only one just because I, would go to some games here and had the pleasure of kind of watching up close. And he does. He moves like an NBA player, sees
Mhm.
the court, but he's not super selfish. There were times where it's like, take over the game, Jacoby. Like you need to take over. And he just played within the system, at least in college. But it'll be interesting. I do think a lot of Baylor players kind of find their roles on NBA teams. There's not
Mhm.
your breakout all-star types, but I do think they find their niche and where they fit. And Jacoby, I think, has potential to take it up a notch from that. But
Yeah, I think he has more potential than a couple of the other guards that have come
yeah,
out recently.
for sure.
And really what's important about Jacoby that also stands out, I mean, a little bit higher class of a player and Stephen Castle, who
Yes.
my first profile will be on. But you mentioned when you watch those two guys move off the ball
Hmm.
and how they move defensively, for those young players to be locked, I think anybody can play if you're a good athlete in college, you can play point of attack defense. It's what you do when the ball's not there, and if you're making the right moves, if you're keeping the defensive integrity and going to the right spots,
Yeah.
and offensively, if you're maintaining spacing, those are things that get you on the floor early as rookies.
Hmm.
And I think Jacoby has it. I think Stephen Castle has it. I think there's some other guys in this, but that's something where that's how you earn minutes early in rotations is
Yeah.
if you know how to stand in the right place,
Yeah.
you're gonna do very well. And
Yeah.
granted, it was a second round pick, but that's something that just drove me insane with Greg Brown
Yeah.
was the third
Oh,
was like
yeah.
he just was never in the right place. And
No.
so that's why, you can be a tremendous athlete, but if you
Hmm.
don't know where to be and maintain spacing and maintain defensive integrity,
Yeah.
it's really hard for you to get those opportunities to develop.
Yeah, no, you're great point. I was gonna say, I mean, as far as athletes go, man, we probably had the Blazers haven't had an athlete like him. Like he was incredible.
Mm,
He had the tools to be a great defensive player if he just cared. I
mm,
don't say he didn't care about it, but paying attention to those things, especially in that help defense and things like
mm.
that. Okay, so I want to transition to some thoughts about kind of what you think the Blazers should do here, and I find it fascinating. I'll lead here, and then you kind of give me some thoughts. Is typically we see in this in like NFL drafts where a lot of teams will move back because the NFL is more about need than like let me just get the best player. It's like, oh, I need to fill offensive lineman, quarterback, whatever. So you see teams draft, they fall back in the draft. Typically NBA teams stay put or they draft up because there is a talent that they can't miss on and stuff. Because this draft is so all over the place, Steve, do you see the Blazers like packaging 7 and 14 and moving this back, potentially even back to next year, like in a year from now, kind of thing? Or do you like where they're picking? Should they move up? What do you think if you were the GM, if you were Joe, and Joe calls you up and says, Steve, I don't know what to do, man. What do we do? What are you telling him?
Okay, so first, if I can find a GM that wants to exchange 2 picks in this draft for any selection in 2025,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do that as quick as possible because that person's about to get fired. So, um, that's right out the gate.
Right.
Um, so really with the trading out of this draft and trying to get into another draft,
Yeah.
I don't think there's an appetite for that at all from the people that I knew that worked in front offices and my limited sourcing on who I know in the industry.
Okay.
There's zero appetite for that. So if you are going to trade into a future draft, it's going to be a couple drafts from now, which might make sense if you're putting one of those picks with a guy like Malcolm Brogdon,
Mm,
trading him to a contender, taking back equal salary,
mhm.
and moving into the 2027 draft or something down the line. That's a possibility. That's on the table. 2025 draft, not getting into it.
Yeah.
Um, as far as moving up, this is something I've been thinking about since the lottery. And I think if the price is right and you're not packaging a pick with Malcolm Brogdon or another player to, sweeten the pot on another deal, I think it's interesting if you really come away from this process, you get intel that somebody really likes someone that you like that's a couple picks in front of you. I'm totally okay with packaging those picks and moving up. And it comes back to something I've already talked about. There's only so many developmental mouths to feed that you can feed on a team. So I would like if they can and there's someone they're, emphatic about and they want to move up, I say they do it. Now,
Mm,
if they move up and take a guy like Donovan Clingan where it's not really a premium position, I would not do that. I would move up to take a guy like even though he's a guard, like Topic, if it's someone you really like that you think has a very high ceiling, a guy like I know I wasn't supposed to talk about him, but Zach Reese-Shea,
yep.
um, or Stephen Castle, if because I think he's someone who can easily climb into the top 3 discussion here. If you come away from this process and really like that player, that's someone I would move up for if you have intel that they're going to go.
Mm,
As far as positionally, what I think the Blazers should do here, I don't think they're in and this is what I've said before, I don't think they're in a position to be picky.
mm,
Obviously, you don't wanna stunt the development, of a number 3 pick investment in Scoot, but, like, if the guard's there and the price is right,
yeah.
you take that player.
Yeah.
Again, this is I I've mentioned it before, I'll mention it again, but this is how you end up with Greg Oden instead of Kevin Durant. This is how you end
Mm,
up with Sam Bowie instead of Clyde Drexler. Like you just
yeah.
take the best player available. And if that player is Rob Dillingham
Yeah.
from Kentucky, a small guard who's really good at offense, not good at defense, should sound familiar to Blazer fans. But but I think that's the move you make
Yeah.
because if you take time to watch Rob Dillingham, he's an
Sure.
electric player
Yeah.
and he can play off the ball. Like he played next to Reed Shepherd
Mhm.
last year. That was your turn, my turn. I'll be off the ball.
Yeah.
I'll catch and shoot. Like
Yeah.
highly efficient NBA player has the whole 3 level offensive game that you want from a modern point guard. Now, I'm not saying take a
Yeah.
point guard,
Yeah.
but I'm saying don't be picky.
Sure.
If that's the person who's on top of your board, you take him.
Okay.
So that
Yeah.
that would be my I guess my big takeaway is if there's a player you really like and you can package both the picks and trade up because you have good
Mhm.
information that player is going to be gone,
Yeah.
take your shot.
Well,
It
yeah, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, and look at this season, going into it, the season that just wrapped up, the hope was that Simons, Sharp, Scoot, we're all gonna be healthy and get tons of minutes. And what happened, Steve? Everyone got hurt, and then all of a sudden we're playing, who was our boy? And he ended
No.
up he got waived, and he had like a Hayes,
Yeah.
Maze,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Skylar
know,
Mays. Yeah.
and so it's like you get these other guys getting minutes. So we get if we draft a guard, there may be minutes there
Mhm.
because of injuries and stuff like that.
And I think just on draft night, I think you have to be open and creative because you do have a roster spot crunch with this team where they are in this stage of a rebuild where you still want roster spot flexibility for trades, for moves,
Mhm.
for really churning the bottom of that roster. So if you can get creative of how you package those picks with players to get, even better deals, even if that's future draft capital, because at the end of the day, like zooming out big picture for this draft, I guess this is going back to that question. If Joe Cronin asked me what to do, I would say let's find a player that can set the table and fit next to a guy like Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp, and most importantly, fit next to one of the top 4 or 5 players that are in next year's draft, because that's
Mhm.
the goal.
Yeah.
And I know it's like we learned this year, the ping pong balls they don't always cooperate.
Yeah.
But if you set the table and things do fall your way, that's how you build, a contender in a small market. So I
Yeah.
would say find a complementary player here, someone who has that right blend of ceiling and floor.
Mhm.
If you only take one bite of the apple here,
Yeah.
um, and find a player that can set the table. And that's why, I'm coming. I mean, I have Stephen Castle on my brain right now, but like
Yeah.
that's someone who I can see addressing a lot of issues with the
Sure.
Blazers defensively that really counters some of the weaknesses with Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp that we've seen so far. Now,
Mhm.
granted, Castle's shot is
Yeah.
underdeveloped to say the least, so that would presents
Sure.
other problems, but
Yeah. Do you think there's any I like the word appetite, but do you think there's any appetite for Atlanta trading the number 1 pick? And would the Blazers even want to entertain that?
I mean, I I could be mistaken, but I think in the 2013 draft, there was talk going into that because that was kind of when LaMarcus kind of started floating the idea that like I might not be signing up for this for much longer. And there
Yeah.
was there was rumors then that
Mhm.
the Cavs had approached the Blazers with the number 1 pick
Mm.
to go get LaMarcus Aldridge.
Oh.
Um, that pick turned out to be Anthony Bennett,
Yeah.
so thankfully we didn't do it.
Thank you.
But
Yeah.
uh, I think this is shit. I think the Hawks are kind of in a similar spot. I've
Mm.
heard there's rumblings going around about the number 1 pick in this draft could maybe get you a serviceable starter on a contending team.
Mm.
Um, I
Mm.
just don't. I don't know if that's feasible for them to get what they want.
Yeah.
With being the number 1 pick and being in that market, having the number 1 spot, you get to be at the top of every headline when it comes to draft for,
Yeah.
X amount of weeks. That might be something the Hawks want. If they're looking to pivot away from a guy like Trey Young, I
Sure.
think this is an opportunity for them to, rebrand themselves, use that number 1 pick
Yep.
and go in a different direction. I just don't think there's enough value even at the top of this draft
Sure.
to justify that. And really you're talking about, you know, good judging by last year's salary structure, you're talking about a $15 million investment on a player that there's no real true
Sh
consensus on.
Sure. So, Jeremy Grant and the number 7 pick for the number 1 pick and some salary to match. Who says no?
I
I
don't
got you thinking. I got you
Yeah,
thinking. I
yeah. I
like it.
mean, I think the Hawks probably just say no just from an optics standpoint
Yeah.
of, what unless, Nate McMillan and Trey Young are, big advocates for a guy like Jeremy Grant. But
Yeah. I
um
think their team, they don't feel like, DeJounte Murray and Trey Young is that it's not quite the Lillard CJ debacle, not debacle, just years of like the same, 2 undersized guards.
mhm.
I don't think it's quite that, but that just doesn't feel like that's going to mesh. So why just keep adding more salary to it?
Yeah, and when you come back to the DeJounte Murray factor here is that probably is why you maybe the biggest reason you hang on to this number 1 pick is because you've given up so many future assets to bring in a guy like Murray. Like,
Yeah.
the chance of you taking a number 1 pick again, even if it's in, a not great draft class, at least at the top, I don't think you can do that. I think you gotta take that player, you gotta take that cap slot, and you gotta know that that's kinda your piece for the future. So,
No, makes sense. Okay. This was my take, and I just want your thoughts on it.
okay.
I feel like if the Blazers had gotten the first pick, I think us as a fan base, our franchise, I think we would have panicked. I think we would have tried to speed things up. I would have felt like 2016 again, where like we just started overpaying people and oh, let's just try to make a run here, or whatever. And I think we would have lost sight of the big goal, which is next season. And I understand the ping pong balls have to drop, but it's also a math game too, and you want to go in with the best odds as you can. And I feel like we you and I have talked about this on the last pod. This is still a rebuild, and we have to understand this season is still going to be a rough one. And because we didn't score high on this draft board, maybe that's a good thing because now we'll focus on the 25 draft.
I mean, you know what team I'm on. I'm on
I
team,
know, I know.
let's not win another game for another year. Let's
Yes,
let's be the first team to get a big 0 there.
yeah,
Um, uh, I can't overstate the importance of next year's draft. Um, I would say as far as I see what you're saying. So you're saying more a Michael Thompson number 1 pick instead of a LaRue Martin number 1 pick if we're
yes,
looking at Blazer history.
yes,
I see what you're saying. I just don't think there's a player in this draft who you're like, we found our foundational piece. Like, this now's it's not like last year with like Wemby, because I think
yeah,
in a different market, um, I think if Wemby's someone you like, let's go from the
yeah,
first minute he arrives, let's get rolling.
yeah.
Um, I don't think there's a player like that in this class. Even with Paulo a little bit, there's not a player like him in this class. So I see what you're saying, but I really do think that like if I have been this intent on the 2025 draft for this
Mhm.
long, I know everybody who works in the league. That's the important one, especially if you're a rebuilding team right now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm on the train with you too.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
I'm I'm in the club with you. Let's not win another game. And for at least another year. I'm with you there. Well, Steve, I'm excited for your profiles that are going to start coming out on Blazers Edge. How many do you know how many profiles you're going to do yet?
So just the first round,
Okay.
I have 13 players right now.
Awesome.
Now granted, that's gonna probably change. So we have players that are rising right now that as new intel comes in, I'll adjust my list. Like, I think most famously for me was I didn't have a profile on Anthony Simons until 2 days before the draft,
Yeah.
and I was finally like, "Ah, I guess I'll do it," because I mean, all signs were pointing to Anthony
Yeah.
Simons.
Yeah. I like
Um,
it.
if I was to give my Anthony Simons type prediction now, even though you didn't ask for it, I really think just
Okay.
all the context clues, the people I know and trust, it really sounds like Cody Williams is, I think,
Okay.
the guy that the Blazers are really watching, the forward out of Colorado, and I think
Okay.
there's not a lot I've seen that's encouraging, but there's the foundation is encouraging. So
Okay.
I think a lot of people are basing Cody Williams his potential on what his brother has done with OKC,
Okay.
Jalen Williams,
Yeah.
J Dub. So I think people are hoping because they're similar size at similar age. They're hoping he'll fill into his frame
Okay.
like his brother did, and there is a lot to like. He plays at a premium position on the wing, has good length, commitment on defense. His shot form, the mechanics are right. It's just got to be a
Okay.
consistency thing. But as far as getting back, so there's my hot take prediction as of
Okay.
today.
I like it, Steve.
Um,
I like it, Steve.
um,
Okay.
uh, I would say 13 to 15 profiles in the first round, and then the second round, I'll just kind of pick out some players that I like that are interesting that I want to highlight.
Cool.
And I would be surprised if the Blazers use both those second round picks. You see a lot of people just kind of trade those away for future
Yeah.
seconds.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. All right. Well, everybody, you heard it first. Steve said we're drafting Cody Williams. 7. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Now he'll
But
never make another shot again.
ever, ever. No more shots.
Yeah.
Well, that would be, I mean, the Blazers, we did Chris Murray after Keegan Murray had a year in the NBA. So we said, okay, let's get Chris. And now we've seen Jalen Williams. So let's get Cody Williams. So
Yeah.
not quite LeBron to to like his son, but we'll take the brothers instead.
Yeah.
So we'll do that.
I mean, it's a long tradition. I mean, we go back. We got Robin Lopez. I mean, we'll always
That's
take
true.
the slightly less talented brother. So
as
that's
long as he can attack mascots, that's
yeah,
all we appreciate.
exactly.
Well, Steve, appreciate the time, man. We're excited for your profiles to start dropping on blazersedge.com. You can check Steve out there. Follow Steve on Twitter. And the Church of Roy podcast comes back when? Okay. Too soon.
If we win the lottery in 2025,
Yes.
I will hard commit to bringing back the podcast. You heard it here.
Heard it here. That's bigger news than who you think we're going to draft. So I love it. All right, Steve, enjoy the rest of your day, man. Thanks.
All right. Take it easy.
All right, that's it. That's the episode. That was awesome. Thank you so much to Steve Dewald for coming on the show, taking time out of his day to drop some knowledge on us. I'm curious. I'm so curious where the Blazers are going to go with this. I feel like the 7th pick, the 14th pick opens up so many variables for what the team could do and should do this draft, but then leaning into next season. And I think that is the hard pill to swallow. Is if we're looking at the 24-25 season, could be a little bit more of what we had this year. And I think that's when we get into the 2025 draft. And if the Blazers did have a really good shot at the number 1 pick in next year's draft and we get 7th, then I'm really, really, really depressed. So, but we'll see. It's all ahead of us. Let's see what this draft has. Like Steve mentioned, like we talked about, no matter if people think this is a good draft or a bad draft, there are players in it. Okay. Nikola Jokic was sitting there. No one knew. Okay. No one can say they knew. Denver just grabbed him in the 2nd round. Like that, they didn't know. So, Giannis, 2013, like I said, the 15th pick in the draft, no one knew. Right. So we don't know. We don't know what's in this draft. We don't know how they can build around our team, maybe trade assets for later. But anyway, so I'm glad you tuned in. I hope you enjoyed Steve. I always love having Steve on the show. We'll bring him back later on this offseason. Thank you for listening. And as always, it is a great day to be a Blazer.